In search of trouble, two bikers entered a peaceful community center. Rather, they located one of the FBI's most illustrious ex-operatives. What followed would reveal a $100 million trafficking scheme, bring down the criminal organization, and deliver a severe lesson to the Night Wolves biker gang. Sometimes a crippled grandmother delivering a class on financial literacy is the most dangerous person in the room. Tell us where you're tuning in from before we resume. Additionally, if this tale resonates with you, please make sure to subscribe, as I have something very special in store for you tomorrow. In Silver Springs, where streets were lined with silver trees in dazzling red and gold hues, the fall air was crisp. Every week, Margaret Lawson taught her class of senior citizens financial literacy while seated in her wheelchair in the front of the community center's main room. She had selected this quiet suburban community because nothing ever happened here, after working in the FBI's white-collar crime division for 30 years. Recall that Margaret spoke to her class with the patience of someone who had spent decades dissecting intricate financial systems. The sophistication of these phone scammers is increasing. They will attempt to hurry you and instill a sense of urgency. Your first warning sign is that a fresh cup of coffee was brought over by the silver-haired director of the community center, Grace Matthews. "Ellie," she began quietly, setting the cup on the desk, "you look tired today." Her kind grin made Margaret think of her own mother, who had been gone for 15 years. Grace didn't know why Margaret always parked her wheelchair with the best view of both exits, or why she still had nightmares that made her sweat. 3 motorbikes with engines purposefully loud enough to rattle the classroom windows rushed into the parking lot, shattering the calm morning. Conversations broke down in the middle when the elderly people stiffened. Grace tightened her hold on her clipboard and her smile wavered. As the Night Wolves dismounted, Margaret observed the unique symbol on their leather jackets and how her students immediately became very interested in their financial worksheets. Leading the way was Marcus Inferno Davidson, who looked across the room with a disfigured face that twisted into what he likely believed to be a charming smile. His lieutenants, Rage Peterson and Bullet Thompson, trailed closely after, all 3 guys acting with the inflated self-confidence of bullies who had never encountered genuine opposition. After staring at Margaret for far too long, Inferno's eyes shifted to Grace. With an edge in his voice that made a few seniors wince, he cried out, "Grace, sweetheart. You were missed at last night's town meeting." Mayor Hayes felt let down. As Grace put down her clipboard, her hands shook a little. "Marcus, I had inventory to complete. You are aware of the situation." "Yes, of course," Inferno said, advancing. "However, when the mayor convenes a meeting, it isn't truly a choice. He needs everyone's support as he works to make this community a better place." Grace flinched as his hand landed hard on the desk. Forgetting her coffee, Margaret observed the conversation in silence. She meticulously documented every aspect. Bullet had a badly disguised knife in his boot. The left side of Inferno's jacket bulged a little. A shoulder holster is misidentified by an amateur. Although their self-assured demeanors indicated they were accustomed to using intimidation tactics, their careless handling of their weapons informed her they had never encountered significant opposition. "Perhaps," Grace responded, her voice now more forceful. "Rather of allowing criminals to dictate policy, the mayor should concentrate on managing the town." The room fell silent. Inferno's phony smile disappeared. "Just what did you say to me?" Before conscious thought took hold, Margaret made a movement. She grasped Inferno's wrist and used her 30 years of federal law enforcement experience to apply precise pressure to nerve clusters that caused his fingers to spasm open. "I think," Margaret added, "the mayor should do his job," in a quiet voice that reverberated across the quiet room. Inferno attempted to get free, but Margaret's hold proved unbreakable. She kept her eyes on Inferno even as rage shifted to her flank. Inferno said, "Leave me alone, or you'll regret it, my boy here." Margaret's smile fell short of her eyes. "Really? Because you have 3 options from where I sit. 1, we forget this happened, and you and your pals go now. 2. I'll send you both to the emergency department if you do something dumb. 3. Inferno winced as she slightly raised the pressure. Before you reach the ground, we check out how many bones I can break. Inferno spat, you don't know who you're playing with. Well, I do, Margaret said. At the age of 15, Marcus Inferno Davidson was dishonorably discharged from the army. You've been conducting protection rackets all over the coast with the Night Wolves, but now you've advanced to a more advanced level. Was there anything I missed? The face of Inferno lost its hue. Bullet reached for his concealed pistol, but Margaret's voice halted him in his tracks. I wouldn't. You announce your intentions like a novice, and your draw is slow. This will be finished by the time you clear leather. No one moved for a long time. Then Inferno gave up with his free hand. Okay, we're heading out. But it's not over yet. It could be, Margaret said, letting him go and moving aside to allow them to leave. You decide that. Inferno stroked his wrist, undermining the three motorcyclists' attempts to appear scary, and they retreated. Inferno gave the window a final glow as they got on their bikes. Who are you? As the motorcyclists blasted off, Grace whispered. Margaret took a drink of her now cold coffee and sat down again. Just a person who has witnessed enough bullies in their lives. However, she realized Inferno was correct about one thing as she saw the Night Wolves vanish down the street. This was not the end of it. If her intuition was right, the protection racket was only the beginning of what she had just painted on her back. The Night Wolves belonged to a much larger group that extended well beyond this tiny community. Grace set a slice of apple pie and a freshly brewed cup of coffee in front of her. You're not alone, the elder woman added firmly, regardless of what comes next. Margaret nodded, mentally rehearsing possible outcomes. Peace was what she had sought in this village, but sometimes it had to be battled for. And if the Night Wolves were out for a battle, they were going to discover why FBI agents, even retired ones, were the last people you wanted on your side. Late that night, Margaret sat in her tiny apartment above the community center, meticulously polishing her Glock 19. As she contemplated her next course of action, the incident with the Night Wolves replayed in her thoughts. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. Without raising her eyes from her work, she yelled, "Deputy, it's open." With a worried expression on her aged face, Deputy Clara Delgado entered. In a tiny community, news spreads quickly. I heard that you and Inferno and his boys had a run-in. New to me, Margaret said, putting her weapon back together. I just had a cordial conversation with several rude customers. With a sigh, Clara took a seat across from her. Look, Margaret, I am aware of your past, Ms. Lawson. I did a check 6 months ago when you moved here. Several accolades, 30 years of FBI service, and highly sensitive material that was inaccessible even with my law enforcement clearance. At last, Margaret raised her head and met her eyes. So you know I'm capable of taking care of myself. That is my concern. These days, the Night Wolves are more than simply a neighborhood gang. They have strong relationships. Clara lowered her voice and leaned forward. We discovered a package in the warehouse district last month that would have aroused severe concerns. Orders to retreat came down from the state level before we could look into it. It sounds like someone is getting paid to ignore it. The Night Wolves Clubhouse is where Mayor Hayes hosts meetings. New cars that they shouldn't be able to afford are driven by half of the city council. All of a sudden, the Port Authority has money for major upgrades. Clara's voice broke a bit. Margaret is my adolescent daughter. I can't take the chance. So you ignore it, Margaret concluded for her. Without killing my people, I do what I can. The young deputy was examined by Margaret. She had fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. A possible ally, if managed properly. Describe the shipment you discovered for me. Clara produced her phone and displayed pictures she had surreptitiously shot of Margaret. Professional packing, armed guards, heavy packages, and far more than the typical contraband. The problem is that they are becoming sloppy out of fear. Margaret had seen that Inferno's people had been following you at the community center ever since you moved to town. All day, 2 night wolf prospects had been parked across the street, making an effort to appear unconcerned. Mike, her former FBI IT specialist, buzzed her phone with a message. "Line is ready and secured. When it's safe, call." Margaret asked Clara, "Your boss knows you're showing me this?" The deputy gave a sad smile. Despite his good nature, Sheriff Cooper is afraid. "Me? I'm sick of seeing our community destroyed by these idiots. When my mother passed away, Grace took care of me by making sure I had hot food and a space to finish my schoolwork. Like you, I've got her back." Once more, Margaret's phone buzzed. "Mike, the warehouse district is showing more activity on the satellite. It's massive, whatever they're planning. Margaret cautioned you. I can take care of myself if they see that you're assisting me. I have had enough, and I'm not alone." Just as expected, a swarm of motorcycles, not night wolves, came up. The colors of these bikes vary. The Iron Legion, under the command of Knox, a huge guy. They moved carefully past, and Margaret noticed their commander nodding subtly. "More difficulties?" Clara asked, her fingers automatically reaching for her weapon. "Perhaps not," Margaret said. The Iron Legion, primarily former military personnel, was unique. They did not prey on civilians, but they did defend their territory. They could be allies, if her intuition was correct. For the 3rd time, her phone buzzed. "Mike, information obtained by comparing the behavior of night wolves with established trafficking routes. Coordinates for several facilities were obtained. Additionally, local intelligence indicates that Iron Legion may be your adversary." Margaret grinned. Everything was coming together. Soon the morning crowd would begin to arrive. Regulars who had seen the altercation yesterday. The word had gotten out. At last, someone had confronted the night wolves. Grace came in with fresh coffee and a worried look on her face. As she slipped a battered leather notepad across the table, she said, "I got something you need to see." Margaret's face hardened as she went over the contents. For years, Grace had kept meticulous records. Financial problems, suspicious activity, and meetings. "This is, Grace. I may only be the director of a community center, but I'm not a moron. I felt that someone would eventually need to hear the truth about what actually occurs in this community." Grace reached into her pocket and took out a USB drive. Notes for 9 years. Everything from the council members beginning to live above their means to Hayes' initial encounter with the night wolves. Clara whistled a little. "You may be the most dangerous person here, ma'am." Mike's surveillance photos buzzed on Margaret's phone. Something large was being brought into their main compound by the night wolves. Teams of professional security personnel that lacked the gang's typical strength. Paperwork bearing governmental stamps. They are preparing for something. Clara watched. According to my contacts, a large shipment is on its way. Something so large that Inferno's people are fleeing in fear. The evidence was laid out on Margaret's table. Mike's satellite data, Clara's pictures, and Grace's notebook. A trend was taking shape. One argument implied the night wolves were merely the outward manifestation of a far more extensive criminal scheme. "You're not only helping the town out, are you?" Grace whispered the question. "It's a personal matter." During her time with the FBI, Margaret reflected on all the tiny communities she had witnessed being overtaken by organized crime. Of the lives ruined by terror and corruption. Personal motivation can simply mean that you'll put in more effort to get it perfect. Mike sent her one last message, and her phone lit up. Moved along well-traveled trafficking routes. There are several cars snagging on Silver Springs. Not gang members, but professional operators. It's huge, whatever they're planning. What should we do next? Clara checked her weapon and inquired. Margaret turned to her improbable friends. An officer who resisted corruption. A director of a community center who had spent years collecting intelligence. Additionally, there may be a motorcycle club with seasoned members who could be persuaded to assist. First, we get more information, Margaret remarked. We then demonstrate to these individuals why a small town should never be undervalued. Above all, she gave a chilly smile. We remind them of the importance of being cautious about who you argue with. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this narrative. Please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It is really important to us. Let's get back to the narrative. The sun was rising over Silver Springs outside. It appeared to the night wolves that they were observing her. However, they were unaware that they were being pursued. The game was only getting started. Margaret Lawson was going to remind them why she had been one of the most successful agents in the FBI. By the time Margaret's private phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mike, night had fallen over Silver Springs. When she opened the file, she saw 3 places within the warehouse district with detailed satellite photography. Structures that are registered to sham corporations but are obviously used as storage facilities by night wolves. Her analysis was interrupted by a tap on her door. Through the opening, Grace murmured, "Betty says you have visitors. They claim to be pals in the back alley." Margaret picked up her Glock and went down the rear stairs with Grace. She discovered Knox and his Iron Legion sergeant-at-arms in the dim alley, as well as an unexpected visitor, FBI agent Isabella Santos. Santos stated without introduction, "I told you to stay retired. I'm now hearing of trafficking activities, motorcycle gangs, and a crippled grandmother stopping 3 motorcyclists at a community center. Isabella, it's good to see you too." Margaret pointed toward the staircase. "Should we?" Santos laid surveillance images on the table inside her apartment. Protection rackets are no longer the only thing the night wolves perform. They're getting into serious drug, weapon, and maybe human trafficking. Our researchers believe they are utilizing Silver Springs as a front to build up a distribution center. Knox muttered, "That makes sense." Margaret's kitchen chair seemed small in comparison to his enormous frame. Easy access to maritime lanes, a small town, and a local government under control. However, that isn't the true reason they made this decision. He gave a folder to Margaret. People they knew had seen them arrive at private airports outside of town. Members of bigger criminal groups, who often stayed out of the spotlight until anything significant was going on. Margaret whispered as she studied the pictures, "They're consolidating, using the night wolves as cover for a major distribution network." "It gets worse," Clara said, going in the back door. Tonight, Mayor Hayes convened an emergency council meeting. The police budget will be cut by 60%, according to their vote. Half of my deputies will have to be let go. Knox finished by clearing the board and ensuring that there was no formal opposition. Margaret looked at the pictures once more. The night wolves would anticipate conflict with law enforcement, possibly from rival gangs. However, they wouldn't be searching for a multidirectional, coordinated attack. What sort of backup is in store? Santos was questioned by Margaret. None, officially. The level of corruption is too great. But Santos grinned informally. To put it mildly, some FBI teams may end up using the region for training drills. Knox bent over. Former Marine Recon and Special Forces Rangers make up half of my crew. We have remained silent and have continued to pass for another MC. However, we have been monitoring these trafficking activities for several months. The rest of my deputies are good, Clara continued. You can't purchase them. Grace, who had been listening silently, raised her voice. I may perhaps be able to assist. Eventually, everyone passes through the community center. Even those who believe they are too significant to be seen in such a setting. And everyone speaks. Margaret's cell rang. Mike. Night wolves transporting dubious goods. There are expert security teams present. There were several cars with diplomatic license plates. They're preparing for something significant, Santos said. A big player is heading to town, according to our sources. Someone at the top of the company. All right, Margaret said. Allow them to bring their entire business here. It will be simpler to eliminate them all at once. Knox's eyebrow went up. Do you have a plan? The first steps of one. They're keeping an eye out for clear dangers. Competing gangs and police raids. She turned to Santos and said, so we give them exactly what they're expecting while we hit them from directions they'll never see coming. I require real-time satellite coverage. I also need you to phone a few people. Old ghosts need to be awakened. The teams of ghosts? Santos questioned acerbically. They shouldn't be there, Margaret. This trafficking business isn't either. Nights are sometimes necessary to combat nights. Clara looked at her gun. What are you requiring from us? Knox. Get your people to begin putting their security under pressure. Nothing overt. It was just enough to keep them staring in the wrong way. Clara, I need selective enforcement from your deputies. Anything to slow down their movements and obtain information, such as license checks and traffic stops. Clara threatened that they would complain to Hayes. Permit them. It will make them careless and suspicious. Grace took her notebook out. Every company they use to launder money has been flagged by me. Every storehouse where illegal goods are kept. If we strike them all simultaneously. Chaos, Knox concluded. They will be unsure of where to direct their response. Once more, Margaret's phone buzzed. Ghost teams recognize you, Mike. All 6 operators were former co-workers. If you want them, you can have them. Then came a message from an unidentified number. Ghost leads are waiting. On your instruction, I'm prepared to go dark. Knox's cell rang. According to my sources, the Advanced Night Wolves unit is doing recon. They are meticulous and competent. These muscles aren't normal. Margaret pulled her group together. Pay close attention. I'm going to tell you something that stays in this room. The Night Wolves and their allies will carry out what they believe to be a flawless takeover of this town in roughly 48 hours. They have the tactical edge. The numbers, and the weapons. They lack a clear knowledge of the person they are actually fighting. She unfolded a thorough map of Silver Springs. They're keeping an eye on the streets and the obvious routes. Law enforcement, the Iron Legion, and anybody else they believe might oppose them are all under surveillance. We will harm them there since they aren't keeping an eye on the Knights. The teams of ghosts. Quietly, Clara asked. Margaret gave a nod. I owe favors to 6 operators, all of them were once in special operations. Those who are adept at moving covertly. They have been planning patrol routes and finding vulnerabilities since yesterday. We're still outnumbered, even with them, Santos said. Fights aren't won by numbers, Margaret said. Initiative, timing, and position all matter. Furthermore, winning a straight fight is not our goal. For the last time, her phone buzzed. Mike, the last satellite pass indicates that a key participant will arrive tomorrow. Lots of cars and strict security. Whatever they have planned, it will shortly begin. Margaret turned to her improbable group. Working off the books is an FBI agent. A head of a motorcycle club with experience in special forces. A deputy battling internal corruption. And a director of a community center who had spent years collecting intelligence. We're hunting, not just guarding, she reminded them. They thought we would be easy victims when they came to our town. Let's demonstrate to them what occurs when predators turn into prey. Storm clouds gathered above Silver Springs, as iron smashed outside. Although the Night Wolves believed they were getting ready for battle, they were actually getting ready for a different kind of conflict. The actual conflict would be fought in the nights by specialists in the impossibly difficult. As enemy operators navigated Silver Spring's gloomy streets, the rain grew heavier, and they felt more confident thanks to their night vision gear. As they patrolled, Margaret observed through her scope, taking note of their whereabouts and habits. These were not typical members of the Night Wolves. They moved too precisely, too professionally. Status, Ghost Lead. Margaret spoke softly into her safe radio. The first squad in place. In 4-man cells, 20 operators are moving. Demo equipment for heavy weapons. They are preparing for a major event. As the Night Wolves security crews set up checkpoints surrounding their compound, Margaret observed through her thermal scope. They maneuvered skillfully, checking corners and covering angles. Professional, risky, yet dependable. Complete Phase 1, she said. The Iron Legion screamed to life across town. It seemed like a hurried evacuation as their motorcycles ironed through the streets. As instructed, the enemy operators divided their forces to look into the new threat. According to Ghost 2, they are split. The bikes are being intercepted by the second team. Now, Clara. Clara activated the ready-made gadgets from her post in the former police station. When strategic transformers blew, some parts of town were illuminated while others were plunged into darkness. As the light conditions changed quickly, the enemy's night vision equipment suddenly became a liability. Ghost 3 confirmed that several targets were confused. Making a move to interact. Key targets in the enemy's command structure were eliminated by the initial shots, which were silent and from suppressed weapons. The Ghost Squad had already dispersed to new locations by the time they became aware that they were being attacked. Mike spoke via her earpiece, "Commander. The third convoy is reserving. Their commander is intelligent. He's noticed there's a problem." "All right," Margaret said. "That is the purpose of the package." Just then, she sent a blast of encrypted data from somewhere close to the town center. The signal was intercepted by the enemy's electronic warfare squad, as expected. Ghost Lead said, "They're on the move. On the transmission source, all units are convergent." Margaret gave a gloomy smile. Stage 3. Every unit does as it pleases. As the actual operation got underway, the storm overhead offered ideal cover. Instead of continuing their decoy drive, the Iron Legion launched synchronized assaults on the enemy's vehicles. Anyone attempting to establish a command position or call for backup was killed by Ghost Team operators. Unexpectedly, Grace's voice could be heard over the radio. To keep in touch, they had provided her with an extra unit. "There's movement at City Hall, Ellie. 3 suit-clad guys just came with Mayor Hayes. They don't appear to be standard security." Margaret changed the channel. "What's up at City Hall, Clara?" "My 2 deputies are observing it." Hayes took the guests directly to his office. "They have diplomatic tags on their briefcases." "Your people see anything like that, Knox?" "Verified. Intercepted a radio broadcast just now. They are discussing completing the arrangements. Hayes is enmeshed in whatever is happening." Margaret's cell rang. Mike. Recognizing faces of Hayes' guests. Known Nexus cartel associates. "Unless something significant is going on, these guys don't show up." The cartel of Nexus. Margaret's heart froze. They had spent years trying to establish a case against Nexus during her time with the FBI. The cartel's specialties included exploiting legal enterprises as fronts, bribing local politicians, and employing small towns as distribution centers. They weren't the only ones that employed the Night Wolves. They were establishing Silver Springs as a key base of operations. Margaret gave the order, "Ghost Lead, change priority targets. The first person on the list is the one who meets with Hayes. What's in those briefcases must be known to us. Make a copy of that. Ghosts 4 and 5 are taking their places. We are watching Hayes' office. Santos, Commander, interrupted. This simply became much larger. When Nexus is involved, federal jurisdiction is involved. In 4 hours, I can have tactical teams here. It will be too late in 4 hours, Margaret said. Now they're preparing something. We must. An explosion in the warehouse district interrupted her. She could see Night Wolves members hurrying to get something out of one of the buildings via her scope. Here's a Knox. I apologize for the noise. The distraction made my boys a little excited. However, you may want to check out what they're relocating. It looks like professional-grade shipping containers. Can your people come closer, Clara? On it already. Deputy Rodriguez is currently sending a stream while positioned with a camera. Night Wolves were seen hurriedly packing crates into unmarked trucks in the video. Her greatest concerns, however, were validated by what she saw when she peered inside one half-open container. Advanced weaponry. The sort that ought to be restricted to military arsenals. Do you notice this, Santos? Copy. This corresponds to supplies to Nexus operations in 3 other states that we have tracked. Silver Spring serves as more than just a distribution center for them. Their main pipeline will be this one. Margaret's thoughts whirled. Hayes's involvement, the diplomatic cover, and the weaponry. Everything was starting to fit together. I need all of the information you can discover about Hayes's travels abroad throughout the previous 12 months, Mike. I'm working on it. However, you must see this. Communications between Hayes's office and a private airport outside of town were just intercepted. In 3 hours, someone important is going to land. Call signs correspond. No leadership from Nexus. Margaret knew they weren't leaving. They're getting ready. They were unfazed by the explosion. They are making room for something larger to arrive. Ghost Lead's voice sounded urgent, Commander. Every key Night Wolves position is in motion. They're bringing in more experienced operators and adopting a defensive stance. They are doing everything they can to safeguard it from whatever is coming. Margaret looked at her timepiece. The storm was intensifying, which improved cover but made things more difficult for them. They had 3 hours, few resources, and no formal backup to sabotage whatever Nexus was plotting. She commanded all units to hold their existing positions. Keep their focus split, Knox. Get your people positioned around that airstrip, Clara. I need all of your information about Hayes's private meetings over the last 12 months, Grace. Santos, here is the moment to use any unofficial assets you may have. And you asked, Ghost Lead, Commander. Watching as additional Night Wolves security squads took up positions throughout the warehouse district, Margaret chambered her gun. I will speak with Mayor Hayes over his selection of business associates. The storm grew stronger. In glaring bursts, lightning illuminates Silver Spring streets. They believed the Night Wolves were ready for anything. They were mistaken. They were unaware that they were about to find themselves sandwiched between a group of ghosts, an army of iron, and a resolute grandma who was sick of seeing criminals raise little communities. It was almost time for the main battle for Silver Springs. Margaret navigated the dim hallways of City Hall, her wheelchair silent on the carpeted flooring. She had learned from years of FBI operations that being exactly who people expected to see may sometimes be the finest cover. This instance included a crippled grandmother who became disoriented within the building. She spoke softly into her hidden radio. There are 2 experts outside his office and 2 at the main door. Although they added muscle, Night Wolves are careless and arrogant. She could hear the storm outside getting stronger through her earphones. Strange nights appeared in the deserted hallways as lightning shot through the windows. From around the corner came the voice of Mayor Hayes's secretary. Those males are growing irritated. According to them, the schedule has advanced. With a stressed tone, Hayes said, "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Sarah, make sure nobody, especially none of Cooper's deputies, comes up here." Margaret gave a gloomy smile. The time was ideal. She put on her most bewildered old woman's face as she turned the corner. She called out to the secretary, "Oh, thank God." I turned around in search of the bathroom. Stairs are a problem for this ancient chair. With trepidation, the secretary glanced toward Hayes's closed door. "Why are you here, Mrs. Lawson?" "The mayor is attending a crucial meeting." "Margaret." Fake warmth immediately covered Hayes's surprise as he emerged from his office. "Why have you come to City Hall?" "I'd rather chat about your recent shipments from the Nexus cartel," Margaret said innocently, "but I just wanted to talk about the funds for the community center." The hue faded from Hayes's visage. Behind him, two suit-clad men reached for concealed firearms. Margaret, however, was already on the move. As she performed a crisp spin, her 20 years of wheelchair fighting training came into play. The first man was caught in the knees by her modified chair's strengthened frame. The second discovered that he was looking down the barrel of her concealed handgun. Margaret's voice was steel now. "Richard, let's discuss your recent international excursions. Especially those fascinating gatherings in Singapore." She said into her radio, "Ghost lead. The package is prepared for documentation." With their weapons pointed on Hayes and his guests, two ghost team operators emerged from the darkness. Silent, professional, and deadly. Hayes sputtered, "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I do, in fact. You approved warehouse leases for Nexus-affiliated shell businesses 3 weeks ago. You approved private security firms with known cartel ties last week. You're anticipating a shipment tonight that would make foreign armament dealers envious." Her cell rang. "Mike, 3 private jets are confirmed to be approaching via satellite. Confirmed on board is high-level Nexus leadership." Margaret and Clara changed the station. "As of right now, my deputies are stationed across the airport. Every access road is monitored by Knox's workers. But we have an issue, Margaret. I was just suspended by Cooper. Appointed Inferno's brother as the acting leader. Naturally, the Night Wolves were establishing their dominance prior to the delivery." The voice of the Phantom lead was urgent, "Commander. The enemy is assembling. Expert operators are relocating to safe transportation routes. They're getting ready for a major event." Hayes laughed, his boldness born of desperation. "Do you believe that this can be stopped? This town belongs to Nexus. It starts with the Night Wolves. By dawn, Silver Springs will be the East Coast's biggest distribution center. Send it, Grace." Margaret called on the radio. Grace turned on her PC across town. All 3 states' main news outlets and law enforcement agencies were inundated with 9 years' worth of painstaking notes, recordings, and financial data. In an instant, Hayes's filthy empire was revealed. As he watched his phone burst with notifications, Hayes murmured, "That's not possible. Those documents were protected." "Richard, you forgot the basic rule of small communities." Margaret grinned icily. "There is always someone listening to what everyone has to say." Her radio gave forth a crackling sound. "Knox. We have movement, Commander. The Night Wolves are leaving their compounds and making their way to the warehouse area. Defensive stances are being used by professional teams." Margaret knew they weren't leaving. "They are preparing to do all in their power to safeguard the package." The voice of Santos entered the channel. "My teams are out for 30 minutes, but there's more, Margaret. Nexus is sending more than simply weaponry. They're coming their whole chain of command. They intend to relocate their headquarters to Silver Springs." Margaret researched Hayes and his connections to the cartel. Everything was coming together. "Since it's flawless, isn't it? Easy access to maritime lanes, a small town, and a local government under control. Richard, you convinced them of the concept, didn't you? Convinced them that the ideal base of operations was Silver Springs. You can't prove it." For the first time, one of the cartel men spoke. Over the radio, Grace's voice could be heard. "We do, in fact. All of Mayor Hayes's meetings have been recorded. He called it insurance. This morning, he discovered his backup drive. People's comments to the cleaning crew are astounding." Margaret saw several messages on her phone. "Huge data transmission verified, Mike. Response teams are being spun up by federal authorities. All enemy forces are gathering on the warehouse district, Ghost lead. They're giving up other jobs. Iron Legion and Nox are positioned and prepared to move." Margaret called Santos. "Do your teams receive that proof? I'm currently uploading to federal servers. It is sufficient to shut off Nexus activities in 12 states." Ghost team operators grabbed Hayes and his guests, as Hayes slumped in defeat. Outside, when the storm peaked, lightning flashed once more. However, another type of storm was on its way to Silver Springs. Margaret broadcast that all forces are ready to begin Operation Iron Strike right away. "You have free weapons on all hostile targets, Ghost teams. Start your run, Nox. Light them up, Clara." For the final time, she looked at Hayes. "Richard, you overlooked another aspect of tiny communities. We defend our own. Additionally, you recently contributed to the dismantling of one of the biggest criminal groups in the nation." Federal alarms blared on various channels, and emergency lights came on in the mayor's office. The leadership of the cartel was preparing to land in what they believed to be a protected town as their jets made their final approach. Rather, they were flying directly into a trap that had been building for 3 weeks. Ghost lead reported, "Commander. Every team is in place. The warehouse neighborhood is being fortified by cartel soldiers and night wolves. They anticipate a direct attack." With a grim grimace, Margaret headed for the door, leaving Hayes and his cartel companions in the care of the Ghost teams. These individuals believed that by inciting terror and corruption, they might seize control of a tiny town. They were going to find out why that was their final error. It was almost time for the main fight for Silver Springs. Margaret Lawson would also remind everyone of why she had been the most successful agent in the FBI. Threatening others isn't always the most hazardous thing to do. The silent elderly woman in a wheelchair has been plotting your devastation for weeks. Margaret watched from her mobile command post as the rain beat down on the metal roofs of the warehouse district. She observed night wolves and cartel operators setting up defensive positions using thermal imaging, their moves revealing their professional training. "Lead Ghost. Last count." She spoke softly into her safe radio. 50+ hostiles. Heavy armaments. Demo equipment. The warehouse district is completely under their control. All high points have spotters. Approach routes are covered by sniper teams. The rows of shipping containers being brought into place as temporary barriers were illuminated by flashes of lightning. These were no longer your typical gang members. This was a military operation carried out by professionals. "Commander." The radio crackled with Knox's voice. "Iron Legion is positioned. 3 jets on final approach are confirmed by my people. 10 minutes are up." Margaret looked at her tactical screen. As she had prophesied, the adversary had done just that. Concentrated their efforts to defend the cartel leadership and the forthcoming shipment. They believed the warehouse district's numerous buildings and labyrinthine nature would be advantageous to them, therefore they had selected it as their stronghold. From her observation station, Clara reported that they are anticipating a frontal assault. All major approaches are covered by heavy weapons. Even anti-vehicle barriers are in place. Margaret said, "Let them wait." "Status on our surveillance, Grace." Grace kept an eye on the compromised security feeds from her command station in the basement of the community center. In Warehouse 7, they have a command center of their own. There are Inferno and what appear to be cartel organizers. They're keeping an eye on police bands and waiting for an official reaction. We're lucky not to be using the official channels. Mike's message chimed on Margaret's phone. They are removing a large object from the subterranean storage, according to thermal imaging. Metal containers. Elevated security. Margaret called Santos. Does that cargo have an ID? Meets requirements for next-generation military equipment. The kind that should only be found in classified facilities. This goes beyond the trafficking of firearms. It is theft of technology at the state level. As Margaret assimilated this knowledge, iron rolled overhead. Just now, the stakes had increased. Targeting priorities should be adjusted for ghost teams. We must keep that technology safe. Copy that, said Ghost Lead. Realigning teams. However, there is movement near the perimeter, Commander. They are mobilizing their swift reaction force. Margaret watched as expert operators shifted into protective positions through her scope. Their equipment was the best, and their formations were flawless. They were getting ready for all the traditional dangers. They're good, said Knox. Margaret clarified that they are predictable. They are preparing for strategies they are familiar with, fighting the last war. Are your people prepared, Clara? Disguised as utility workers, deputies are in plaque. During a hurricane, no one gives repair workers a second glance. Knox. Iron Legion is prepared. They won't anticipate what's ahead, Margaret said with a gloomy smile. Operation Iron Strike should be carried out by all units. The first phase has begun. A carefully orchestrated mayhem broke out throughout the warehouse sector. The motorcycles of the Iron Legion came to life, but not in the places they were supposed to be. Portable speakers Grace had placed days prior produced the sound, generating phantom targets that attracted enemy fire and attention. Ghost Lead reported with delight that they are dividing their forces. Teams with rapid reaction times are reacting to several places. Margaret ordered Phase 2. Clara's deputies activated the district's emergency systems while mounted in utility trucks. Sprinklers turned on in some buildings, while fire alarms sounded in others. The enemy's advantage in night vision was destroyed by the chaotic strobing of emergency lights. Mike's voice was urgent, Commander. 5 minutes before touchdown, the jets are on their last approach. The time was ideal. You have guns on chosen targets, ghost teams. Start your true run, Knox. Light them up, Clara. The actual attack started with surgical accuracy. Key enemy commanders were killed by ghost team operators using silenced guns after they had entered positions days before. Instead of attacking from the ground, the Iron Legion's members rappelled down into enemy positions from maintenance catwalks above. As Grace watched the security cams, she said, "They're in chaos. Their hierarchy is disintegrating." Once more, Margaret keyed her radio. "Your teams have well-defined routes to approach, Santos. Now move in." FBI tactical teams came out of hiding places after surreptitiously posing as maintenance workmen. The night wolves and cartel operators were led into death zones they were unfamiliar with and forced to combat invisible foes in a well-planned ambush. Ghost Lead's voice was urgent, Commander. Targets of high value were identified. Inferno's encounter with an individual in Warehouse 7. Expert security detail. Qualifications for diplomacy. When Margaret saw the figure on thermal imaging, her blood froze. Marcus Cross is in charge of Nexus's global operations. The jets provided a distraction. He's here already. Your old Singaporean friend? Santos questioned sternly. Margaret confirmed that it was the one that escaped. The man who, years before, had killed 2 of her comrades during an operation. How fitting that he made his final error in Silver Springs. Margaret observed through her tactical display as Cross's security detail attempted to evacuate him via tunnels beneath the ground. But all the escape routes had been identified years earlier by Grace's careful intelligence. Margaret directed all units to shift their emphasis. Now, Cross is the main target. Teams of ghosts gather at Warehouse 7. Cut off their underground exits, Knox. Send your people to these coordinates, Clara. It is time to remind Mr. Cross of the reasons he ought to have remained in Singapore. As Margaret positioned her wheelchair, lightning shattered the sky. She has her customized rifle ready. Cross believed he was entering his new headquarters. Rather, he had fallen into a trap that had been set for years by someone he had written off as being just another person from a little town. Ghost Lead reported, Commander. Cross's team is in a precarious situation. They're discussing erasing the proof and burning everything. Margaret said icily, let them try. Threatening predators aren't always the most dangerous. It's the one that has been surreptitiously pursuing you. As Margaret was ready for the last part of the operation, the storm peaked. Cross and his group were going to discover the importance of never underestimating a little village. Or the reserve granny who had hunted individuals just like them for decades. Margaret navigated the tangle of shipping containers in Warehouse 7. The customized wheels of her wheelchair made no sound on the concrete floor. It had been 3 years since her last encounter with Marcus Cross in Singapore. She was forced to resign after losing 2 teammates in that procedure. He had now brought his operation to her town by some twist of fate. She muttered, Ghost Lead, status on Cross's security detail. 8 ex-military operatives. He's being moved in the direction of the subterranean entrance. But Commander, there's a problem. They're too composed. Margaret had also observed that. Under attack, Cross's soldiers weren't moving as a cohesive unit. They were moving as if they were carrying out a prearranged strategy. She called softly, Grace. On the security feeds, what do you see? They are systematically inspecting particular containers. As if they're trying to find something. What about Margaret? Our observations do not align with the manifests. There shouldn't be half of these containers. Margaret observed Cross's crew working with practice deficiencies using her thermal scope. Deep scan those containers, Mike. On it already. These shipping containers aren't your typical ones. They have military-grade, advanced shielding. They don't want it discovered, whatever's within. Margaret analyzed this knowledge while lightning flashed through the high windows of the warehouse. Do you notice this, Santos? Verified. Cross does more than just move guns. These containers meet requirements for institutions that provide mobile intelligence. He is not establishing a center for distribution. He is creating a network of night intelligence. Commander. Knox spoke urgently. Communications were just intercepted by my people. The actual security crew from Cross is still on the way. These operators. Something else is involved. The discovery made Margaret's blood run cold. It's a team for rehabilitation. Singapore was a successful endeavor. It was a trial run. For years, Cross has been preparing this. Her thoughts quickly returned to that Singaporean evening. The procedure that didn't work out. She lost her teammates. The intelligence that vanished. It had not been a haphazard arms transaction. Cross had been working on a considerably larger proof of concept. Ghost teams. New priority, she said. It is forbidden for such containers to leave this warehouse. The far side of the structure was rocked by an explosion, whatever was inside. Margaret could see Night Wolves members interacting with Cross's operators through the haze. However, there was a problem. They were engaged in combat. Clara reports. Just now, Inferno betrayed Cross's warriors. Something about being betrayed is what he's saying. Regarding Cross's use of the Night Wolves as a temporary disguise. A smile of bitterness appeared on Margaret's face. At last he worked it out. Cross had no intention of collaborating with them. The Night Wolves were merely handy local strength. When everything went wrong, I was meant to take the fall. Commander. The Ghost Lead interrupted. Cross is going to block C of the container. Our thermals, however, being blocked. Sophisticated countermeasures of some sort. Margaret looked at her tactical screen. Block C, the same area in Singapore where thermal imaging was lost. She mumbled, history repeating itself. Her radio gave forth a crackling sound. She recognized the voice, it had been 3 years since she had heard it. Hi, Margaret. Getting around on that chair is still possible. What a waste of skill. Marcus, she said icily. You continue to play spy master while hiding behind better men. Cross chuckled. The reverberation reverberated throughout the warehouse. You were never able to grasp the wider picture. Weapons were not the focus of Singapore. The goal was to demonstrate that we could relocate whole intelligence operations covertly. Little cities, Margaret. Ideal cover. In communities like Silver Springs, cargo containers are ignored. Have you got a chance, Ghost Lead? No. They have a smoke screen up of some sort. Sophisticated technology. We've never seen anything like this. Margaret saw knights move through the man-made fog through her scope. Cross had very skilled operators. However, they were lacking an essential component. Turn off the emergency sprinklers, Grace. Each and every one. But believe me, the flames. Margaret grinned when the sprinklers turned off. Marcus, you forgot something. Singapore was close to sea level and humid. However, Silver Springs? She changed the channel. Now Knox. Perched on the roof of the warehouse, the Iron Legion flung open the ventilation hatches. A chimney appearance was produced as the chilly autumn air surged in. Cross's sophisticated smoke screen, built for tropical climates, quickly evaporated in the icy air. You have unobstructed lines of sight, ghost teams. Participate as you like. Accurate, well-coordinated fire exploded throughout the warehouse. Suddenly exposed, Cross's operatives were sandwiched between the angry night wolves and ghost team snipers. Margaret. Now there was genuine fear in Cross's voice. You're not understanding. What are these canisters filled with? It goes beyond weapons. Outside of drugs. This is about intelligence gathering itself and molding it. Marcus, no. Justice is at issue here. For Singapore. For each small town you attempted to transform into your own private kingdom. What's the evidence situation, Clara? Safe, as well as all of Hayes's documents. Everything is being downloaded by Santos's teams. Margaret adjusted the position of her wheelchair. Her rifle aimed on the last known position of Cross. Because you believed us to be weak, you selected Silver Springs. Since nobody would think a little community could defend itself. That was your last error. She watched Cross break cover and rush for a secret escape via her scope. However, Margaret had been pursuing individuals like him for 30 years. She had anticipated every scenario and charted every escape route. The most dangerous person isn't always the one threatening, Marcus, she said gently as she squeezed the trigger. The silent grandma has been waiting for 3 years to complete the task you began in Singapore. Iron roared overhead as the shot reverberated around the warehouse. Ghost team operatives crowded onto Cross's position, and he fell, holding his leg. The night wolves completely turned against the surviving cartel forces after understanding they had been duped. However, Margaret's intuition told her that this was not the end. As if to confirm her suspicions, Cross's phone rang with an urgent message from Mike. She was too astute to not have a backup plan. There are several fresh thermal signals coming from the north. Heavy weaponry and skilled operators. Cross's actual security detail has just shown up. The last fatal stage of the fight for Silver Springs was about to begin. As Cross's actual security force arrived, gunshots broke out throughout the warehouse district. With the kind of accuracy that only comes from years of collaboration, 3 tactical teams of former Special Operations troops move. Like a tidal wave, they struck the perimeter. In contrast, their teamwork makes the Night Wolves appear inexperienced. Status: Ghost Lead. Over the increasingly disorganized radio traffic, Margaret called. Several breaches to the east and north. Commander, these aren't your typical operators. Their formations are classified. Black Ops strategies used by the military. Through her thermal vision, Margaret observed the new menace carefully destroying her outer barriers. They weren't hired guns. They were professionals with training from the government who had left for the private sector. Relegate your guys to supporting roles, Knox. Avoid trying to compete with them directly. The leader of the Iron Legion was already on the move. They're not merely pushing us back, Margaret. They're directing us away from particular containers and constructing designated hallways. What do you see, Clara? There was tension in the deputy's voice. There's more to it than just getting a route to cross. As if they were responding to a signal, they are constantly examining their portable electronics. Margaret could see the tactical teams moved purposefully through the rain-streaked windows. Despite his injuries, Cross, who was still restrained by Ghost Team operators, was grinning. "Margaret, do you still not see it?" Cross yelled. "What made me pick Silver Springs? Examine your surroundings. Small town, ideal satellite coverage angles, and no electronic interference. We're not merely constructing a distribution center. We are developing a new type of network of intelligence." Margaret's cell buzzed frantically. "Getting beyond their encryption, Mike. These containers serve purposes beyond simple storage. They are SIGINT stations on wheels. Cross has been constructing a private intelligence collection system." Margaret called Linder. "Take another look at those power grid readings. On it already. The rise that we noticed last week wasn't caused by the security systems in the warehouse. Massive amounts of power are being pulled by these containers and sent through subterranean connections. The parts came together with a click. The technical teams posing as Night Wolves members, the precise container placements, and the advanced shielding. Cross engaged in more than just weapon trafficking. He has a Night NSA under construction." Margaret changed the channel. "Santos. Do you understand? Verified. Small towns all throughout the nation have been used by Cross. A portion of his network is contained in each one. His command center was gonna be Silver Springs. As Cross's squads broke through the inner barrier, the warehouse was rocked by another explosion. Operators of the Ghost Squad retreated to places they had planned, but they were outnumbered and up against an adversary who was aware of all their strategies. "We're losing containment," Ghost Lead told Commander. "These men are familiar with our strategy. Every move we make is being countered by them." Margaret recognized it was because they had contributed to its writing. These aren't just former service members. They used to be intelligence officers. The people who instructed us. Cross finally figured it out and laughed from his safe position. "Singapore served just as a prototype. We had to be certain that we could transport delicate equipment covertly. Small towns are ideal. Everybody sees what they anticipate. A group of motorcyclists stirring up trouble. Common issues in small towns. No one investigates further. What's the evidence situation, Clara?" "In the backup site, safely. But we have another issue, Margaret. These teams aren't merely aiming for Cross. Like they're searching for a certain item, they're meticulously going through every building and car." Margaret digested this knowledge with a burst of lightning. It was too simple for Cross to be wounded and captured. It was his desire to be seized, to be in the center of the warehouse district. Suddenly, she gave the command, "Ghost teams fall back. It's a trap. Cross is the diversion, not the aim." Her warning, however, was too late. In the warehouse district, hidden charges exploded. To deactivate electronics, not to destroy. The advanced communication equipment of the Ghost Squad stopped working. Report, Knox. The north side is being pushed through. Professional breaching teams that move as if they know the layouts of buildings by heart. Margaret's thoughts whirled. Cross spent years planning this. The trafficking of weaponry, the night wolves, and even his own capture were all meticulously planned to place his actual operators. Kill the electricity immediately, Grace, kill it all. Margaret's thermal imaging captured a spectacular moment before the warehouse district fell into darkness. Massive power signatures moved beneath the concrete floor. She breathed the actual facilities. It's underground, not in the containers. The containers are only the beginning. Cross's voice crackled on her radio once again. Margaret, you can't stop this. The future of intelligence collection is ideal for small towns like Silver Springs. Nobody looks twice or suspects. It's too late by the time they realize. Margaret observed via her scope as further tactical squads appeared from concealed openings. What was left of the night wolves was being driven back. It was difficult for even the ghost teams to hold their positions. How long till backup arrives, Santos? At least 20 minutes. There's another thing, Margaret. We recently deciphered further Hayes files. Cross has been accumulating information about everyone in addition to creating an intelligence network. Intelligence officers, military commanders, and politicians. Margaret concluded, he'll have power over half the government once this network goes live. Get your folks to the backup rally spot, Clara. Start Operation Ironclap, Knox. The director of the community center answered, Grace, already on it. I'm currently starting the backup arrangements. As Margaret watched Cross's soldiers move forward, she fired a new bullet into her weapon. They believed they had every possible scenario planned out and every angle covered, but they had overlooked a vital fact about tiny towns. The threat with the most advanced machinery or the most skilled personnel isn't always the most threatening. Occasionally, it's the silent neighborhood that has been observing, anticipating, and getting ready to defend itself. Put Operation Ironclap into action. The confusion of combat was broken by Margaret's order. Protocol 7, all units. The reaction was terrible and swift. Carefully hidden defensive mechanisms came into action throughout the warehouse district. Over the last 6 months, local construction workers have been doing more than just fixing roads. They had been setting up battlefields. How is your backup equipment doing, Ghost Lead? We're now moving to secondary communications. Our main systems were taken out by Cross's EMP, but we anticipated that, Margaret concluded. Grace turned on a number of switches from her command post. The subterranean electrical grid is cut off and diverted to emergency systems. The backup generators in the town are operational. The Ghost team's advanced technology had been turned off by Cross's tactical teams, but they had no idea that the director of the community center in a tiny town had spent years charting every underground wire, every electrical line, and every possible tactical advantage. According to Clara, they're heading for the southeast entrance. Heavy weapons, professional teams. They are attempting to protect their subterranean entrances. Through her backup thermal system, Margaret observed the precise movements of Cross's operators in the nights. They were excellent, possibly the greatest in the world, but they had committed a critical error. Start your run, Knox. Knox's guys weren't just another biker club, as demonstrated by the Iron Legion's response. Former Special Forces personnel with years of combat experience emerged from hidden locations. The perimeter was not where they had been waiting. They had been disguising themselves as maintenance workers, warehouse employees, or even potential night wolves in order to avoid detection. Cross's team is dispersing, the main force is still pursuing the underground facility, but smaller groups are breaking away, according to a call from Commander Ghost Lead. They're on their way to certain containers. Margaret said, let them. Grace, as planned, the containers are rigged and prepared. Margaret observed via her scope as Cross's operators arrived at their objectives. With expert efficiency, they broke down the container doors and discovered unoccupied areas. Days earlier, Margaret's personal surveillance devices had taken the place of T. He actual intelligence equipment. "They're in our kill zones," Knox said gratifiedly. Over the radio frequency they had commandeered, Cross's voice crackled. "Do you believe you have one? You don't know what you're up against. This facility is only one node in a network that spans the entire country. We're not attempting to take down your entire network today, even if you stop us here." Margaret interrupted him. "Only the command center, which is the center of your business. I'm downloading everything now, Grace." Although they had strong security, they never considered inspecting the town's initial telephone system. For weeks, they have been tapping their data lines. Cross laughed with real laughter. "Do you believe that our security may be jeopardized by a small-town monitoring operation?" Margaret concurred that our encryption was superior than that of contemporary technologies. However, this is Grace, who has spent 40 years keeping an eye on communications in Silver Springs. Older technologies can sometimes be the greatest. As Cross's operators were aware that their private information was being taken, the fight changed. They gave up their deliberate advance and started acting more violently and desperately. "Clara, how are the residents of the town? Is everyone out of the battle area?" Procedures for emergencies operated flawlessly. The town seemed deserted, just as we had intended. Margaret gave a gloomy smile. Every traditional threat had been practiced for by Cross's troops, but they had never thought that a whole town may be ready for them. That any utility employee, business owner, and seemingly innocent resident might be a member of a coordinated resistance. Ghost Lead's voice sounded urgent. "Commander. They have a major thing planned. Several groups gathering at the main warehouse." Margaret saw, using her thermal imaging, while Cross's personnel put together what appeared to be specialist drilling apparatus. They intended to forcibly enter the subterranean facility. "They're becoming predictable now," she noted. "My folks are in place, Knox. We have been residing in those access tunnels for the past week, which they are ready to breach. A welcoming celebration will be waiting for them." Cross's voice returned, this time with strain. "You're tampering with something much more significant than you realize. This goes beyond merely obtaining intelligence. We can construct narratives, influence decisions, and manage the flow of information throughout the nation via this network." "One thing," Margaret said, "you're right. Compared to Silver Springs, this is larger. We're not simply battling you here because of this." Several messages rang on her phone. Cross's entire network is coming to light as a result of Mike's planned raids that started in 12 other small towns. Santos, federal squads are advancing around the country. All of the nodes you identified are being struck at the same time. "You see," Margaret added, "Marcus. We were working on something else while you were busy constructing your underground stronghold. A chain of tiny communities that resisted being attacked. Grace. A communications blackout is currently underway. Cross's subterranean facility started to power up, and they cut their links to other facilities. Thermal imaging reveals its enormous energy signature. But it found itself alone, disconnected, and exposed rather than joining his wider network." Margaret instructed the ghost teams to work. "Start your last approach. Collapse their escape routes, Knox. Put your people in blocking positions, Clara." Iron rolled overhead, and lightning flashed once again. The fight below is accompanied by nature itself. Cross believed that small towns were easy targets, which is why he had picked Silver Springs. He was going to find out how mistaken he had been. Margaret occasionally chatted quietly while preparing for the last stage. The force with the best trained operators and the most sophisticated equipment is not the most deadly. Sometimes the peaceful neighborhood has been observing, anticipating, and getting ready to demonstrate why you should never undervalue a small town. As Margaret's soldiers came together, the subterranean complex beneath Warehouse 7 pulsed with power. As she had expected, Cross's operators had successfully penetrated the primary access tunnel. But they came upon a well-planned killing ground rather than a weak command center. Margaret contacted while keeping an eye on the thermal feeds to check on the status of the underground teams and the ghost lead. The main passage was traversed by 3 hostile squads. They are competent, employing sophisticated formations and keeping an eye out for traps, yet they are moving just where we want them to. Margaret followed the progress of Cross's top teams with her customized imaging equipment. Their methods were faultless, their motions were flawless, and they were entirely predictable. Are your people in place, Knox? In the maintenance tunnels, ready. The original building blueprints, which Grace has been gathering for the past 20 years, were never considered by these affluent government boys. Through their hacked communications, Cross's voice cracked. You believe that you will be saved by hiding in these tunnels. The world's top military engineers created this facility. No, Marcus, said Margaret coolly. Carlson Construction, a family-run local contractor, created the design. Guess who has been handling their books for the last 15 years? They have been building in Silver Springs for 3 generations. There was a note of satisfaction in Grace's voice. People's statements to their accountants are astounding, particularly when they are attempting to conceal specific specialist information from their tax forms. The underground conflict played out like a lethal game of chess. They were looking for a high-tech command center for Cross's operatives. They ended up in a labyrinth of abandoned maintenance tunnels, storage spaces, and emergency bunkers instead. There was an ambush location at every turn. Another tactical disadvantage on every corridor. According to Ghost Lead, Commander, they are beginning to recognize that something is off. Their formation is becoming more defensive and tight. How is the evidence collection going, Clara? Everything is being downloaded by my teams. These guys were so preoccupied with safeguarding their brand new servers that they failed to notice us using the outdated copper phone lines. Sometimes analog is preferable to digital. Margaret saw the traces of frustration creep into Cross's forces. They were losing the precision of their coordinated motions and their flawless formations. This type of underground combat is not what they were prepared for. They were trained for high-tech warfare. You have no idea what you're getting involved in, Cross growled on the radio. The goal of this center is to govern intelligence, not only collect it. We can control what people see and think using this network. Margaret interrupted him, proving once more that he was mistaken. You selected little towns because you believed that we were straightforward, remote, and controllable. You never realized how these communities function in reality. She saw as more of Cross's operators advanced farther into the tunnel complex using her thermal imaging. Although they were looking for servers, control rooms, and high-tech equipment, Margaret's business wasn't really driven by technology. Grace demonstrated to them the true nature of the information network in a tiny town. Dozens of regular people in Silver Springs started to move with intention. The proprietor of a diner who had been recording talks for years, the postal worker who had tracked odd deliveries, and the computer instructor at the high school who had observed odd patterns in internet traffic. Every bit of information, observation, and questionable detail was meticulously gathered and organized. Ghost Lead, Commander, phoned immediately. Something is amiss when they get closer to the central chamber. He's smiling, Cross. Margaret's gut told her to be careful. Unless. Cross was too seasoned to fall for such a clear trap. She abruptly gave the command, all units, fall back. Now, Knox, evacuate your people from the bottom tunnels. The whole warehouse district was shaken by the explosion. In order to confine his soldiers inside what he believed to be the command center, Cross had rigged the underground facility with demolition explosives rather than destroying it. See? Cross's voice was one of victory. You're stuck down here with us now. You can't reach your backup. You are no longer able to communicate. Margaret gave a gloomy smile. What's going on at the actual command center, Grace? Mabel's beauty salon is safe and secure. Been managing the entire business directly in front of them. The reason a small town salon required such a large power supply was never considered by these boys. Cross's operatives believed they were trapping Margaret's forces, so they had barricaded themselves in the underground facility. Rather, they had entered the last stage of her scheme. Execute Patton Delta, ghost teams. Collapse their escape routes, Knox. Get your people to the extraction locations, Clara. Data centers and servers weren't the actual battleground. For something much more precious. Evidence. Proof of Cross's whole operation. Collected by regular people who had just paid attention and kept records, not by advanced monitoring. With a hint of urgency in his voice, Cross emphasized that this was more than just Silver Springs. Numerous small communities have amenities similar to this one. We are aware, Margaret said. Why do you suppose we allowed you to construct them? They were all meticulously observed, recorded, and ready for this moment. Coordinated raids are starting now, Grace. It turns out that people in small towns talk to each other more than you might have imagined. In anticipation of this signal, every community you attempted to conquer has been cooperating. Margaret observed the breakdown of Cross' flawless operation using her thermal imaging. His operators faced an adversary that had spent years preparing for this moment, stranded below and disconnected from their support system. You see, Marcus, 30 years of experience were in Margaret's voice. Our patience, attention to detail, and refusal to allow bullies and criminals to take what isn't theirs are more harmful in small communities than our technology or strategies. As Cross's operators attempted to push their way through Knox collapsed passageways, the underground complex trembled with yet another controlled explosion, but each explosion simply made them more trapped in Margaret's meticulously constructed labyrinth. Lead casualties from ghosts. Over the secure link, Margaret called. 2 of our personnel were injured, but not seriously. Because they are not accustomed to fighting blind in limited areas, enemy forces are suffering greater losses. Margaret's improved imaging technology allowed her to follow heat signatures as they moved through the tunnels, revealing that Cross's best squads were disintegrating as confusion and panic disrupted their flawless formations. Commander. Clara's voice sounded urgent and strained. At the police station, there is activity. All remaining officers have been directed to the warehouse district by Chief Cooper, who claims that this is necessary to support federal operations. Margaret came to the conclusion that he was attempting to position his dishonest officers to assist Cross. Grace. The evidence has already been secured. Cooper is unaware that half of his devoted policemen are cooperating with us. Since his initial dubious promotion 5 years ago, he has been establishing that network. A flashback to Singapore crossed Margaret's mind. Another subterranean institution, another dishonest official who believed he was in charge. Her head was still blazing with the memories of her lost companions. Knox. How is the Iron Legion doing? The main entrances are guarded by my guys, but we discovered something in one of the sealed rooms, Margaret. Something that clarifies Cross's decision to go with Silver Springs. Show me. Deep within the facility, the thermal feed moved to a secret room. There was more to the technology than just data collection and surveillance. There was only one goal in mind for the servers and specialized equipment. Margaret breathed, manipulating memory. They are attempting to rewrite intelligence, not merely gather it. Alter the way that people recall things. Through the hacked radio channel came Cross's laughter. I finally figured it out. Singapore did not fail. The test was successful. Small towns are ideal. You have influence over their reality if you can manipulate their recollections. Margaret knew that you needed the night wolves once we had it perfected here. Local muscle to keep things under control as you gradually changed everyone's opinions. Encourage them to accept the changes as normal and to forget about the corruption. Commander. There was genuine worry in Ghost Lead's voice. The lowest level was just breached by Cross's crew. They are using a backup mechanism of some sort. Margaret observed the complex's power signatures start to spike. Cross was activating something, not trying to get away. What are you seeing, Grace? Enormous energy drain that permeates the outdated electrical grid. He's attempting to get the device to do whatever it does. Cross shouted, "You can't stop this. The application is already operational. Everyone in Silver Springs will forget this night ever happened in a few minutes. Ignore everything that caused them to be wary of us. We'll feel in control all the time." Margaret, however, smiled as he spoke. "Now, Clara." Lights went out across Silver Springs. From a planned shutdown rather than a power outage. Every house, every business, every street light. The town fell into complete darkness. "What? What are you doing?" Cross made a demand. Margaret answered, "Teaching you another lesson about small towns. We discussed and made plans together. Every household and business owner volunteered to assist when Clara alerted us to the installation of odd equipment in the electricity infrastructure. The entire town cannot be shut down. We've already done it. Your memory tampering device requires power. A lot of it. If you can't reach people, you can't influence their thoughts." Margaret saw Cross's operators understand their situation through her thermal imaging. They were cut off from assistance, stranded underground with deteriorating equipment, and up against an adversary that had spent months preparing for this moment. On the lowest level, ghost teams get together. "Knox, advance your people. It's time to demonstrate to them the true nature of small-town opposition." Margaret's instincts, however, cried out a warning as her forces advanced into position. Cross was too skilled to be apprehended that quickly. That was what she had learned from the Singapore operation. New thermal signatures showed up on her screens, confirming her suspicion. More operators are revealed as hidden rooms open. Cross's actual top team is on standby. She called for all units to brace for contact. It becomes severe at this point. "It's serious already," Cross said. Now his voice was professional and cold. "Because you were unable to grasp the wider picture, I lost good men in Singapore. I won't repeat that error." New explosions rattled the facility, but they weren't sporadic. Cross's reserve squad was leveraging their understanding of the actual architecture of the facility to launch a coordinated attack. Ghost Lead said, "Commander, we're being pushed back. These men are superior and unusual." Margaret recognized them as the Singaporeans. "My teammates Grace, Clara, and Initiate Protocol Omega were slaughtered by them. Revert to secondary roles, everyone else." Santos interrupted the emergency channel, "Margaret. Trust me, whatever you're planning," Margaret said, looking at her specialist weapon. Cross believes he now understands tiny towns completely. It's time to show him everything Singapore has to offer. Margaret Lawson was finally going to face the spirits that had plagued her since that botched operation 3 years prior, and the war was about to enter its most perilous phase. Technology or strategies aren't always the best weapons. It's the resolve of a person who has been waiting for years to make amends. With a hush that appeared to engulf the underground complex, Protocol Omega began. Suddenly, every system, piece of equipment, and light went out. Only the red emergency lights was left to send bleeding nights down the tunnels, even the backup generators went silent. Margaret directed all teams to switch to backup communications. It's time to let them experience true darkness. She observed Cross's Singapore team navigate the complex via her specialist scope. Their coordination and formation were excellent. In addition to being exceptional operators, these individuals had contributed to the development of contemporary fighting strategies. "Do you recognize any of the ghost leads?" "Yes. Jensen's group. Half of our training manuals were written by them." They were reported as Kia 3 years ago and were meant to be dead, Commander. Yet another of Cross's tricks, Margaret said glumly. In Singapore, he not only took technology but also people. The finest of the best, rendered inconspicuous. The Singaporean team moved like knights, evading every common strategy and foreseeing every expected reaction. However, Grace, Margaret had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. What is the town power grid status? Total shutdown, exactly as we had intended. They were unaware that we were aware of the backup systems at night. But something is still pulling power, Margaret, and we're picking up some sort of signal. Deep into the facility, Margaret detected a faint energy signature using her thermal imaging. It came from something older, something that existed long before Cross's operation, not from his equipment. What's under the warehouse district, Clara? Initial infrastructure. I'll look over Grace's files. The previous civil defense network included a Cold War bunker system. Margaret concluded, the power lines are still there, but most people forgot about it. Cross didn't start from scratch when building this facility. He modified something that was previously there. Ghost Lead's voice was urgent, Commander. Jensen's group is approaching the area of the old bunker. We don't know what they know. Margaret's thoughts whirled. Weapons and routine information gathering had never been Singapore's focus. The power requirements, the memory alteration technology, and the targeted small-town targeting were all part of a larger scheme. Status of your position, Knox. Capturing casualties while retaining the upper tunnels. Not only are these guys good, but they fight as if they had nothing to lose. Margaret watched through her scope as Jensen's squad broke through yet another locked door. They moved without hesitation, without question. They were not searching for a way out. They had a precise destination in mind. Do you not have it put together? There was sincere respect in Cross's voice. The actual operation was never in Singapore. The goal of the recruitment drive was to identify the top operators who were prepared to see beyond the immediate situation. Through treachery against their own people. Margaret insisted. By pretending they died and turning them against their nation. By revealing the truth to them. Margaret, small towns are America's backbone. Manage their recollections. You have the heart of the country. Making people forget isn't the only purpose of the technology. Making them recall events that never occurred is the goal. She had a chilly revelation. The bunkers during the Cold War. They weren't used for protection. They served the purpose of research, according to Cross. The first mass manipulation experiments by the government. This is not a network that we created. We located it. Left behind. Ignored. All set to be roused. The voice of Ghost Lead interrupted. Jensen's crew has descended to the lowest rank, Commander. They are entering a facility that has been hardened. Older security systems are becoming more powerful. Margaret decided for herself. Grace and Clara carry out Protocol Omega's last stage. Remove your people from the tunnels, Knox. Ghost squads retreat to their exits. Santos issued a warning over the emergency channel to Margaret. Cross isn't the only one with long-term planning skills, if that's what you're thinking. Margaret answered. All set, Grace. The town has prepared an emergency response. Exactly how we had intended. Clara. There are deputies on duty. Everyone is clear who needs to be clear. In the direction of the old service elevator, Margaret rolled her wheelchair. She has her customized rifle ready. Understanding the past is sometimes the best defense against the future. Cross believed he could control an old weapon he unearthed. It was time to demonstrate to him why some things were destined to remain buried. As Margaret readied herself to face not only Jensen's squad but also the spirits of Singapore, the elevator plunged into darkness. Above, her troops launched a coordinated withdrawal, carrying out a strategy that had been planned for months. Cross said, "You cannot stop what's coming. The program has already begun. Every American small town will soon." "Will what?" Margaret interrupted him. "Recall events that never occurred. Make up a history that didn't exist. Marcus, you overlooked an important aspect of tiny communities. Our memories exist outside of our brains. Our churches, restaurants, community centers, stories we tell, and customs we uphold all contain them." When the elevator descended to the lowest floor, a huge room brimming with antiquated computers and odd apparatus was revealed. In order to get the outdated systems up, Jensen's team was already there and working with practiced efficiencies. The most dangerous weapon isn't always the newest technology or the best trained operators, Margaret murmured quietly as she shifted into position. Sometimes, those who are unwilling to forget who they truly are the ones who preserve the plain truth. Margaret Lawson was going to demonstrate to Cross, Jensen, and the others why some secrets should remain hidden in the past as the climactic confrontation got ready to start. A sickly green glow filled the basement vault as the old processors buzzed to life. Margaret observed Jensen's cooperation, their motions accurate in spite of the unfamiliar environment. These were the individuals who had murdered her teammates in Singapore, and they now had a more sinister agenda. "Don't you realize the true nature of this place?" Cross's words reverberated across the room. The first attempt at memory manipulation by the government was called Project Recall. They selected small towns because they were ideal testing grounds due to their close-knit communities and isolation. Margaret followed Jensen's operators through the old systems with her thermal scope. Their effectiveness told her everything. They had prepared especially for these antiquated machines and trained for this. She muttered into her radio, "Grace. In the old records, what are you discovering? We underestimated the severity. Project Recall involved more than one location. They erected them beneath numerous small communities around the nation. The selection of Silver Springs was not arbitrary. The network already included it." Margaret observed as other systems came online, with antiquated machinery in some way interacting with Cross's contemporary electronics. "Status on the surface, Clara. Police scanners are going crazy. Strange memories and uncertainty about basic facts are being reported by people. The town is already feeling the effects of whatever they're powering up there." Jensen himself appeared, his motions possessing the same lethal elegance she recalled from her time in Singapore. "Eleanor, you should have remained retired," he yelled. "Loyalty to a flag or a badge isn't everything." Margaret retorted, moving her wheelchair into a better firing position, as if she were violating all she had vowed to safeguard. "Giving criminals the ability to alter people's memories. You're still not getting it." Jensen sounded sincere in his voice. "People remember too much, which has left the world in disarray. Generational pain, old grievances, and old hatreds. We can help them forget the pain with this technology. Make history better." Margaret saw something important through her scope. Not all of the old devices were computers. They were transmitting devices that were intended to influence entire populations' brain patterns. "Are you seeing this, Ghost Lead?" "Verified. The installation of the modern equipment Cross. It is weaponizing the outdated system rather than merely improving it. Transforming an unrefined experiment into an accurate instrument." Margaret's thoughts whirled. The crooked officials, the advanced contemporary facility, and the night wolves protection networks. All of it had been a front for something darker and much older. "What's going on your level, Knox?" "Margaret, people are behaving strangely. Some people believe that the Cold War never ended, and my boys are reporting seeing citizens strolling the streets, unsure of the year. Some people have trouble recalling basic details about their own life. Isn't it lovely enough?" Cross spoke up. "The human psyche is incredibly flexible. Their entire reality changes when you show them a few photographs that have been changed and create some false recollections. Small towns are ideal. Everyone is aware that everyone has similar experiences. An entire community's history can be altered by altering a few significant recollections. Margaret concluded. However, you made a critical error. Oh. Jensen's group took a break from their task. Weapons were trained on her. What is that, too? You overlooked individuals such as Grace. They are the silent ones who record things, write them down, and preserve the truth on paper and ink as well as in their memories. Grace's voice came over the radio as if at the exact moment. You must see this, Margaret. It was discovered in the town's original archives. Instead of failing, Project Recall bounced back. The initial test subjects not only resisted the memory manipulation, but also became somewhat immune to it. Inherited it from previous generations. Not possible. Cross broke. The technology is infallible. We put it to the test in Singapore. Margaret interrupted him when he was on military targets. Isolated people. Small towns, however, are unique. We have a connection. Not by closeness or technology alone, but by something more profound. Something that cannot be changed or erased. She saw Jensen's squad becoming more and more agitated through her thermal imaging. The outdated systems were reacting strangely. Displays that reveal surprising trends. Are you seeing anything up there now, Clara? Something amazing. Individuals are now assisting one another in remembering instead of simply becoming perplexed. Relating tales and displaying old pictures. The town itself appears to be retaliating. Margaret gave a gloomy smile. For that reason, it is. Grace. All set. Each church bell. Every automobile horn. All of the town's public speech systems. Carry out. The sound of Silver Springs exploded. Harmony, not turmoil. Familiar hymns came out from church bells. Traditional festival patterns were sounded by car horns. The community anthem was played by the high school band, which was positioned thoughtfully across the town. What? What are you doing? As his gadget readings went crazy, Cross demanded. Margaret answered, reminding individuals of their identity. With something more potent, not with technology or deceit. Sincere, communal experience. The kind that cannot be rewritten or faked. It was too late for Jensen's crew to stop it. Something its designers had never thought of was overwhelming the ancient devices that were meant to repress and change memories. An entire community's willing and active remembering. Margaret said, Ghost squads, come in. Knox, go ahead. Start the roundup, Clara. It's time to demonstrate to these memory manipulators why certain things cannot be changed or removed. Margaret Lawson was going to remind everyone why tiny towns were the worst potential targets for those who attempted to alter history as the final stage of the struggle for Silver Spring's soul approached. Because technology and guns aren't always the best defense. It is the unbreakable ties of a group of people who are determined to remember their true selves. Project Recall's antiquated technologies struggled against the immense power of a town's collective memory, causing the subterranean chamber to tremble with opposing forces. Jensen's crew frantically tried to keep their equipment under control, but something was amiss. It is impossible to get the readings. A technician from Jensen yelled. The transmitted patterns are somehow magnified and reflected back. Through her thermal imaging, Margaret saw the Singapore team's flawless poise start to falter. Despite their extensive training for all traditional threats, these top operators had never encountered anything comparable. Margaret called softly, Grace. How has the town responded so far? Margaret, it's spreading. Individuals are actively sharing memories rather than only recalling them. Mrs. Peterson produced the century-old photo books belonging to her family. Live readings of town documents, including the Night Wolves, are being performed by the High School History Club. How about them? Younger members who grew up here are betraying Cross's people by claiming that the memories they are being given don't correspond with their own early years. Margaret watched Jensen reviewing his own data feeds via her scope, his face becoming more worried. "There's no way," he whispered. "The technology is flawless. In Singapore, we demonstrated it." "Did Margaret confront you, or did you merely believe that you did?" "Jensen, tell me what you truly recall about Singapore. Not the memories that Cross implanted, but the actual ones." Margaret knew she had struck a nerve when the elite operator froze for a brief moment. "Are you seeing this, Ghost Lead?" "It's true, Commander. They are patterns in the brain. They are more than merely operators carrying out commands. Their own technology has made them victims." Now, there was real worry in Cross's voice. He gave Jensen's crew the command to shut it down. "Now shut everything down." The old machines, however, had gained momentum on their own. Generations of small-town life and decades of repressed memories were resurfacing in their systems, not only from Project Recall's initial studies. "What's going on up there, Clara?" "Margaret, it's like watching the town awaken. In the streets, people are congregating and exchanging tales. Those most impacted by Cross's technologies." Margaret grinned grimly as she said, "They're being helped by their neighbors, shown old photographs, reminded of who they really are. Small towns were the worst targets because of this, Jensen. We are more than a collection of personal memories. We are living repositories of our common history. Tell us about your situation, Knox." "Commander, you must see this. The Legion of Iron. We are no longer only fighting them. They are being reminded." These kinds of communities supplied half of Jensen's operators. Margaret saw that additional members of the Singapore team started displaying symptoms of recognition and perplexity after you broke through the fake memories using her thermal imaging. When implanted memories battled against actual ones, the flawless military precision faltered. "Turn on the last stage, Grace." Every church bell in Silver Spring started ringing in a particular pattern. It was the customary sequence used to commemorate the town's founding, not just random noise. In time with the high school football team's winning song, car horns began to honk. Grace played recordings of decades worth of town hall sessions from the community center. "What are you doing?" With genuine terror now in his voice, Cross urged. Margaret answered, "To show you the difference between implanted memories and real ones. Marcus, you can make them forget. They can even be forced to recall events that never occurred. However, the shared experiences and emotional links that unite communities cannot be faked." Now Jensen's crew was falling apart completely. As real memories overtook the fake ones, some operators dropped their firearms. The feedback of a whole community actively and deliberately remembering caused the old machines to smoke and flash. Margaret said, "Ghost squads, come in. Keep Jensen's people safe. They are now just as much victims as adversaries. Knox, come to where I am. Lock down any surface resistance that might still exist, Clara. It's not over yet." Cross growled, but there was no conviction in his voice. "The technology and the program are complete." Margaret interrupted him. "Marcus, you realize what your true error was. Not the strategies, not the technology. It believed memory to be nothing more than data. Something you can change or remove whenever you choose. However, genuine memories, the kind that unite tiny towns, are not kept in our brains. Our hearts are engraved with them." Margaret stared through her sight as Jensen himself dropped his rifle at last. Real recollections of his own youth in a tiny village pierced his conditioning, causing tears to fall down his cheeks. Margaret said quietly that sometimes technology and might aren't the best defenses against evil. It's the straightforward truth, upheld by those who see the value of their common past and will never allow it to be altered. Margaret Lawson was going to demonstrate to Cross why his entire operation was doomed from the moment he decided to attack not just a tiny town but the unbreakable links that held it together. The war for Silver Spring's soul was coming to a head. Cross equipment started to overload, and the warning systems of the old building blared. Not because of failure, but because of the overwhelming number of genuine memories that are resurfacing on the network. Margaret observed him desperately trying to save his operation at the main control station using her thermal imaging. Cross shouted above the alarms, "You don't understand what you've done. These memories were suppressed for a reason. It's better to forget some things." Margaret challenged, moving her wheelchair into a better firing position, just like what had occurred in Singapore. "The truth about how you incited their own people to oppose our greatest operators." A ghost lead? "How is Jensen's team doing?" "Commander, most have stepped aside. Memory conditioning is disintegrating. They are beginning to recall their true selves." However, Cross is still covered by a few loyalists. Another burst of memories swept through the outdated systems, causing the facility to tremble. Not only from Silver Springs, but from all the tiny towns that were part of the initial network of Project Recall. "What are you seeing, Grace?" "It's amazing, Margaret. Not just our town is being impacted by the comments. Other communities that were a part of the previous network are also starting to wake up." Cross failed in more ways than one. He unintentionally set off a national recall of memories that had been suppressed. Margaret peered through her scope as the rest of Cross's operators took up defensive positions. Like guys starting to doubt their own reality, their movements were still professional but unsure. "Do you consider this a win?" Cross growled, at last losing his cool. "The truth is too much for these people's minds to process. Control was not the goal of the first Project Recall. The goal was to preserve communities' stability by erasing the more negative aspects of their past." Status on the surface, Clara. "Margaret, Towns is completely awake now. Even the police officers who have been corrupted are recalling their true allegiances and pledges. Cooper simply gave up and requested a complete confession." Margaret gave a gloomy smile. "Marcus, you see, true memories cannot be wiped forever. They can be temporarily overwritten, buried, or suppressed. However, the truth always comes to light." Knox placement. "The higher levels have been seized by Iron Legion. He's assisting us, Jensen. Claims that he now remembers everything. The conditioning, Singapore, everything. Wishes to put things right." Desperate to save something from his failing operation, Cross's fingers skimmed over his controls. But more of his meticulously created phony world fell apart with every second that went by. He declared that he was drawing a specialized weapon as a last warning. "I'm not only attempting to keep the program safe. These towns are full of secrets. Even Project Recall was unable to completely repress things that were so deeply buried. If these memories come flooding back, it is not up to you to decide that." Margaret interrupted him. "Ghost teams, carry out the last confinement procedure." With flawless coordination, Ghost team operatives appeared from concealed locations across the building. The remaining supporters of Cross were encircled, their tactical edge nullified. "Send Santos all we discovered, Grace. Every document, every bit of proof. Completed already. FBI personnel are safeguarding other Project Recall facilities around the country. Cross's whole network is made public." Margaret observed, using her thermal vision, as one by one, Cross's alternatives vanished. His flawless strategy, which had taken years to develop, was being destroyed by the unwavering power of true human connection rather than by force or technology. "You have no idea what you're letting loose." Cross tried one last time. Some of these recollections date back to the most bleak periods of the Cold War. Secret operations and government experiments. Things that ought to have remained hidden. Margaret completed the task for him. "Marcus, no. The true poison does not lie in recalling harsh realities. It's in attempting to exclude them. Nobody knows it better than small towns. She made one last keystroke on her radio. Perform Operation Daybreak, all units. All the lights of Silver Springs came blazing to life. In addition to buildings and street lights, there are also decades-old civil defense sirens that have had their sound patterns altered to fit the town's celebrations of victory. What distinguishes your authentic recollections from your fake ones? Ghost team operators moved to secure Cross while Margaret spoke to him. Technology or coercion are not necessary for the survival of real memories. They are there in the tales we share, the customs we uphold, and the bonds we form with one another. When Cross finally realized he was defeated, his weapon clattered to the ground. His flawless operation and years of preparation had been undone by something he had never considered accounting for, not by better technology or strategies. The indomitable spirit of America's little towns. The force with the most sophisticated weapons or the most skilled operators isn't always the most dangerous, Margaret stated quietly as her troops advanced for the last arrest. Occasionally, the peaceful community is the one that forbids anyone from changing their narrative. The impact of the struggle for Silver Springs was just getting started, but it was coming to an end. Other little communities around the nation were awakening, remembering, and demonstrating to the world why people who undervalue the importance of true human connection can never break certain bonds. As federal personnel started to secure the underground complex, dawn broke over Silver Springs. With weary eyes, Margaret watched as Cross was escorted away in chains, his flawless enterprise now in ruins. However, the actual task was only getting started. With a scratchy voice from the long night, she called, "Ghost Lead, casualty report. None of our operators are critically injured, but 3 are. In the last effort, Knox lost 2 guys. The majority of Jensen's squad is currently detained, but they are now more victims than inmates. There is a total breakdown in the memory conditioning." Margaret followed the cleanup crews as they moved through the complex using her thermal imaging. They were cataloging, documenting, and preparing the old project recall equipment for safe transportation. "How is the town's recovery going, Grace?" "Those most impacted by the memory tampering are being treated by medical experts. The majority of people are aiding one another in remembering. Everyone is contributing their true histories, including ancient letters, family photos, and community records." As technicians downloaded decades worth of confidential material, Margaret wheeled her wheelchair toward the main control room of the facility. The reality about Project Recall applied to all small towns that had served as testing grounds, not only Silver Springs. "What's going on topside, Clara?" "Margaret, we're receiving calls from neighboring towns, but the streets are safe and Cooper and his dishonest officers are in jail. Communities across the nation are beginning to recall things that were meant to remain hidden as Cross's network comes to an end." Margaret saw through her scope as Jensen himself assisted FBI teams in locating important evidence. As he identified particular systems and described how Cross had altered the outdated Cold War equipment, the elite operators' hands trembled. "We discovered something in the deeper archives, recordings of other programs, and other experiments," Commander Ghost Lead reported. Project Recall served as a testbed for something more significant than only memory alteration. According to Grace, Santos is working with agencies around the country. Similar facilities, each comprising fragments of a larger enterprise, are being found in dozens of small communities. There were critical texts buzzing on Margaret's phone. "Mike is using face recognition to hit matches all over the nation. Additional Singaporean team members, all believed to be dead, all employed in comparable institutions. Knox, chapters of Iron Legion are reporting activity in other places, and there is an attempt to obliterate evidence." Then Margaret noticed that they were running. When Cross's people realized that their entire network was hacked, Santos interrupted the secure line. "We're regrouping, monitoring communications, and there are other commanders and branches involved in the operation." Cross was only a single component of a much bigger whole. Margaret observed further federal units arriving in Silver Springs through her tactical display. A national inquiry was focusing on the town, but something didn't feel right. The evidence they were discovering was too orderly and tidy. Before the project recall, Grace, review the previous records. On it already. These records date back to the 1950s, Margaret. The Cold War experiments were a continuation of a process that began immediately following World War II, not its inception. Clara's voice was worried. What are you contemplating? That cross was adhering to an outdated strategy in addition to utilizing outdated technologies. These tiny towns weren't picked at random. They were chosen because to what they stood for and what they had the potential to become. Ghost Lead, Commander, phoned immediately. Jensen wants to talk to you. Claims that everyone is missing something, that is, the reason they selected Silver Springs in the first place. Margaret walked over to where Jensen was being held in the holding area. Despite his damaged appearance, the former top operator had a clarity in his eyes that had never been there before. Tell me, she said plainly. With a trembling voice, Jensen clarified that it was never about managing memories. The true objective was merely a tool. It was about Margaret, little communities, and making the ideal cover. Places where strangers are noticeable and where everyone knows one another. The ideal hiding spots for objects and persons that shouldn't be there. The implication struck Margaret with a chill. Controlling communities and erasing memories were only two aspects of Cross's program. The goal was to establish safe havens that were concealed from view and shielded by small-town life itself. She gave the order for ghost squads to start a thorough search of all municipal records. Get your workers to inspect every company and property that has changed ownership in the past 50 years, Knox. I've already pulled the files, Grace. You won't believe what I'm discovering, Margaret. Margaret Lawson recognized that conquering Cross was not the end of the narrative as the sun rose higher over Silver Springs. It was only the beginning of revealing a plot that has been utilizing little towns across America as unsuspecting stewards of secrets that were never supposed to be revealed. As her squad started their new mission, she whispered, sometimes. What people forget isn't the most scary reality. It's what has always been concealed by their recollections. Margaret examined the papers arranged on the main table of the community center, each one exposing a new level of dishonesty. Silver Springs had not been a random choice for Cross's business. Decades ago, the town was ready for this duty. What else have you discovered in the ancient town documents, Grace? Margaret, it's not what's in them. That's what's absent. Years in which physical evidence and official records don't agree. Structures that sprung up overnight. Companies that were in existence on paper but that no one can recall. Margaret observed federal teams continue their town search through the windows. However, she was disturbed by their search pattern. They missed the subtle clues that only locals would notice because they were searching all the obvious spots. Ghost Lead, surveillance status. 3 additional operator teams were found departing from other small towns. They aren't merely sprinting. They are carrying out a protocol of some sort. Planned retreats, bringing particular objects along. Margaret put the pieces together, her thoughts racing. Clara looked through the ancient records of the property. Pay attention to companies that changed ownership at significant national occasions. Margaret is already on it. Every time a crisis occurs, a pattern emerges. Economic collapses, political upheavals, and Cold War tensions. In Silver Springs, the ownership of certain properties changed. Always in silence. Always to shell corporations that have no trail. Margaret observed through her tactical display as other communities reported similar discoveries by Knox's Iron Legion crews. Every small town had an own set of enigmatic features. Its own local memory gaps. Jensen called the former operator who is currently assisting with the investigation and gave me an explanation. If they have these properties already, why would they need memory manipulation? Why expose the enterprise at risk? The strain of regained memories was visible on Jensen's face. They needed the communities themselves to change since ownership was insufficient. If it makes sense, to see without seeing. To put up with something that shouldn't be allowed. Ghost lead, commander, interrupted. In the ancient bank documents, we discovered something. Decades of consistent payouts. Not technically bribes, but support from the community, Margaret concluded. Contributions to regional charities. Financing for public works initiatives. Making themselves vital to the existence of the town. There was urgency in Grace's voice. You must see this, Margaret. I just discovered it in my mom's old documents. In the 1960s, she served as the town clerk. Maintained her personal documents. The program that manipulates memory. The towns were not intended to be under its influence. People began to raise inquiries, which led to its development. Beginning to take attention. Margaret watched as FBI teams unearthed more secret rooms through her scope. Additional hidden storage spaces. However, the most significant evidence was not found in actual locations. The pattern itself contained it. Are you understanding, Santos? Verified. Similar results are being reported across. The storage locations were small communities. Safe dwellings and staging areas. The alteration of the memory was merely upkeep. Preserving the stability of the foundations. Clara's voice trembled a little. I discovered my grandfather's old journals, Margaret. In the 1950s, he served as the deputy here. The things he claimed to have seen but was never able to look into. Margaret concluded because no one would trust him. Alternatively, the memory manipulation would cause them to forget if they did begin to believe. Jensen moved to the front. His damaged conditioning is at odds with his professional training. It was more than just population control and concealment. These communities were picked because they are inherently impervious to outside influences. Closely connected groups. Suspicious of new people. Self-protective. Margaret thought, perfect cover. Make use of what gives little towns their strength. Devotion to the community. Protection of one another. Mistrust of those from outside. To conceal activities in full view. Urgent texts buzzed on her phone. Mike, monitoring trends in finances. Similar configurations have been seen in hundreds of tiny communities. In 3 additional places, Knox, my people discovered cache spots. Military-grade gear. Preserved despite being decades old. Ghost lead reported, Commander. More information is coming from Jensen's old teammates. The Singapore operation involved more than just hiring top operators. They required individuals who were familiar with the dynamics of tiny towns. Who could fit in and join communities. Margaret considered the consequences in her head. The danger hadn't been Cross's memory tricks. It was but one instrument in a much bigger scheme. An enterprise that had created an unseen network of secrets in America's little towns. Gather whatever you've discovered, Grace. Clara, have your deputies guard any area that fits the pattern. The Iron Legion leader confirmed that Knox was already in motion. Now, my folks are aware of what to search for. In each location we visit, we find comparable installations. Margaret observed as additional parts of the puzzle came into view through her tactical display. Every little town was a chain link. Every town is unwittingly protecting fragments of a vast, covert network. The most deadly secrets aren't always kept in classified bunkers or high-security institutions, she remarked softly. They are concealed in plain view. Shielded by those they are being concealed from. As Margaret Lawson got ready to reveal not just one operation but a decades-old system that had made America's heartland an unwitting steward of the country's darkest secrets, the sun rose higher over Silver Springs. The basement of the community hall has been turned into a war room. Maps on the walls that depict the links between America's small towns. Margaret examined the trend that arose from their research. More threads of the hidden network are revealed with each discovery. Ghost lead, the status of the agents being pursued. In other locations, 3 teams followed to comparable facilities. They're retrieving particular objects, not just running. Observing a set protocol of some sort. Margaret's tactical display allowed her to see as other federal teams across the country reported identical findings. However, their answer seemed planned in some way. As though they were acting according to a script that was meant to give the impression that they were acting, but, in reality, they were limiting the exposure. What are you discovering in the records that have been cross-referenced, Grace? Margaret, it's larger than we anticipated. These settlements served as more than just warehouses. They served as makeshift bases for operations that never really happened. Every neighborhood was selected based on particular attributes. Geographic location, population density, and nearby industry that might offer protection. Clara interrupted, her expression tight. We're having issues. I just heard from the state level. They are attempting to halt our inquiry. Claiming to be concerned about national security. Margaret's thoughts whirled. Cross's personnel were not the source of the pressure. This came from a higher authority. From those who wished to keep the truth hidden. She called to the old operator, Jensen. Tell me what actually transpired in Singapore, please. The whole tale. Jensen put out his own papers, his hands trembling a little. Controlling operators was only one aspect of the memory manipulation. The goal was to design ideal infiltration units. Individuals who could be integrated into small communities. They were given fictitious histories and recollections that were so flawless that they even believed them. Ghost Lead, Commander, reported immediately. We're monitoring fresh activity. Not Cross's people, but professional teams. These are not the same. Diplomatic plates and government vehicles. Margaret watched the fresh arrivals through her scope. Their motions were too flawless. Their credentials are too spotless. This was not a team for responding. It was a unit for containment. Knox. Update on your research. 5 additional towns have cache spots discovered by my people. Military hardware, but it's not a common problem. Weaponry prototypes. Experimental technology. Things that shouldn't be there. There was tightness in Grace's voice. In the sealed records, Margaret just discovered something. Project Recall was not an initiative of the Cold War. It was designed to preserve an existing entity. The pieces began to fit together, a chain of small villages that had participated in World War II's Operation Hometown. This system was not created by Cross. He simply managed to keep it going by manipulating memory to prevent people from wondering what had been concealed in their communities for many years. Clara. How many of your deputies do you completely trust? 6, 8, perhaps. Those with strong familial ties who were born and reared here. Take them to the money-making websites Knox discovered. Before the containment teams show up, we have to make sure everything is secure. Urgent texts buzzed on her phone. Mike. Identifying significant purges of data in government systems. The evidence is being attempted to be erased. Santos. Pressure from several different agencies. This is something they want buried. Commander. Ghost Lead made a report. More information is coming from Jensen's old teammates. The operation in Singapore. It served as a trial run for a larger project. They were producing more than just sleeper agents. They were getting ready to take the network worldwide. As more government teams gathered at Silver Springs, Margaret observed through her tactical feed. They moved with the assurance of those accustomed to solving issues. Of concealing facts that are too risky to be revealed. Grace. Make copies of everything. Every one of your documents. Every piece of proof. Distribute it to all local newspapers. Every historian in the area. All the nation's community libraries. They will attempt to undermine it. Clara cautioned. Give it a shot. Margaret answered. Small towns preserve the truth in their own unique ways. Their own communication and trust networks, which are not subject to external supervision. Via her scope. As the containment crews started setting up perimeters, she observed. They believed they were dealing with a straightforward security lapse. A small exposure that needs to be kept under control. What they were never able to comprehend. Silently, Margaret spoke. Is that tiny towns are more than merely locations on a map. They are dynamic networks of connections. Of mutual trust and common histories. That cannot simply be removed by force or technology. Jensen gave a slow nod. The memory modification eventually failed because of this. People can be made to forget facts by you. However, the deeper links that unite communities cannot be eliminated. As more government teams arrived, Margaret's radio crackled with ever-increasing urgency. However, she grinned because she knew the truth was already getting out through uncontrollable ways. Through coffee shops and religious organizations. Through local historical societies and family get-togethers. As government containment troops built up their perimeter, the sun began to drop above Silver Springs. Using her thermal imaging, Margaret observed their deliberate strategy. These weren't your typical federal officers. However, troops with specialized training are made to conceal unpleasant facts. Let Ghost. The state of our situations. Commanders are in place. However, these aren't amateur crosses. The novels we studied were written by these authors. Margaret used her scope to follow their pattern of movement. Perfect isolation protocol was being carried out by the containment teams. Halting all formal correspondence while getting ready to manage the story. How is the information distribution going, Grace? They're already spreading more quickly than they can stop. Our proof is reaching every community bulletin board, local radio station, and small town newspaper in the nation. They are unable to stop them all. By use of her strategic demonstration. As additional government cars pulled up, Margaret watched. Their formal credentials and diplomatic plates were insufficient to conceal their genuine intent. They were cleaners. Sent to hide the truth about the way tiny villages in America had been exploited. What do you see, Clara? They are attempting to be nuanced. However, they encircle every place we found. The issue is that they have no idea what the locals know. Each back alley. Every secret route. All the unapproved paths between properties. Margaret gave a gloomy smile. The containment teams had studied execution procedures and tactical guides. However, they had never recognized the true power of tiny towns. The unmapped and uncontrollable invisible networks of communication and trust. Are your people prepared, Knox? Chapters of Iron Legion are waiting nationwide. There are riders in place in every little town where a facility is suspected. They won't be aware of the impact. Urgent texts buzzed on her phone. Mike. Systems of government demonstrating synchronized action. They have a cover story in the works. Santos. The highest levels are exerting pressure. They are referring to it as a national security issue. Ghost Lead reported, Commander. Jensen wants to talk to you. Claims to be aware of their true target. To go to where Jensen was keeping an eye on communications, Margaret pushed her wheelchair across. The strain of retrieved memories was visible on the former operator's face. Battling years of conditioning. Their purpose is not limited to limiting the publicity. Jensen clarified. He spoke in a strained voice. The facilities. The caches that are hidden. Those are merely symptoms. The system itself is what they truly wish to Safagu. ARD. The network that creates ideal hiding spots in small communities. Margaret peered through her scope as the containment teams started to move forward. They moved flawlessly. They have the most advanced equipment. However, they were committing a critical error. Grace. Start the sunlight procedure. Lights came on all across Silver Springs. Not only in residences and workplaces, but in old grain silos, barn lofts, and church steeples. The townspeople have kept up every secret observation station throughout the years, without even understanding the reason. Clara. Are your folks in place? Every deputy who grew up here is prepared. Plus over 200 volunteers. Farmers. Educators. Store owners. Everyone they believed would not defend themselves. An official voice crackled on Margaret's radio. The federal command is this. A classified operation is being interfered with by you. Resign right away or suffer dire penalties. Margaret Lawson is this person. She answered coolly. An ex-FBI agent. Grandmother in a tiny town today. And someone who is sick of seeing influential people utilize our communities as private repositories. She saw more lights turn on through her tactical monitor. Small towns all around the nation, not only Silver Springs. When communities wake up, they remember, and they refuse to be used anymore. Ghost teams, follow the Omega pattern. Start your run, Knox. Light them up, Clara. The containment teams encountered a whole aroused population in addition to tactical opposition. Passive resistance was encountered at every attempt to secure a location. Roads are being repaired all of a sudden. Inexplicably, power is failing. Local expertise thwarting their well-laid schemes. The federal commander said, "You don't know what you're exposing. Some secrets must remain hidden." "No," Margaret firmly said. "You never realized that tiny towns aren't just places where you can keep your secrets. Communities with our own integrity are what we're living. We have a right to know what has been concealed from us." She observed through her thermal imaging as the flawless formation of the containment team started to fall apart. To deal with resistance, they received training. Not this sort, though. Whole communities did not band together in non-violent but resolute resistance. Over Silver Springs, dawn arrived. The aftermath of the night's confrontation is revealed by its light. The containment forces from the government remained still, surrounded by something much more strong than armed opposition. A community that was awakened and refused to give up. Margaret called softly, "Ghost lead, final status." "Commander, all teams are in position." However, something has changed. New orders are coming in for the containment units. At the highest level, something is taking place. Margaret's tactical display allowed her to observe the government teams starting a systematic withdrawal. Not in defeat, but in reaction to an uncontrollable flood of publicity. "Grace, how is the distribution of the information going?" "Margaret, it's everywhere. Every neighborhood bulletin board, local radio station, and small-town newspaper in the nation. It is now impossible to halt. Too many individuals are aware of the reality." There were messages from all across the country buzzing through her phone. "Mike, there is a great deal of internal uncertainty in government databases. Agencies are at odds over response protocols. Santos, turmoil at the upper levels. There is too much exposure for traditional confinement. According to the Ghost lead, Commander, Jensen has something you should see." Where the former operator was keeping an eye on national communications, Margaret rolled her wheelchair over. The feeds revealed just what they had anticipated. America's small villages are waking up, exchanging notes, and providing proof of what had been concealed within their borders. "What are you observing outside, Clara?" "It's lovely, Margaret. In the town square, people are congregating, telling each other stories, and supporting one another's memory. There is no longer any fear. They're not only upset about being taken advantage of. They take pride in their unity." Margaret observed the containment crews loading into their vans via her scope. The strength of united communities speaking truth to power renders their flawless protocols ineffective. Knox, the current state of the national reaction. Everywhere, Iron Legion chapters are reporting the same thing. Silence is not an option for small towns. All of the secret caches and hidden facilities are being revealed. Through the straightforward power of neighbors conversing with one another, rather than through violence. The federal commander came flying a truce flag. Although he was professional, his poise faltered. "You don't realize what you've done," he said somberly. "Well, we do," Margaret said. "America has been reminded that tiny communities are more than just locations on a map. Since we are actual communities, we have a right to know what has been going on among us." He contended that some secrets shield people. Certain realities are too risky. "No," Margaret interrupted him. "The idea that entire communities might serve as unintentional defenders of your darkness is scary. That those who have lived here for generations are subject to your manipulation and control." She saw more townspeople come out through her tactical display. With evidence, not with weapons. Decades of silent observations, old photographs, and family diaries are finally being made public. "Grace, demonstrate to them the true nature of community intelligence." Small villages all around the nation started exchanging their puzzle parts. The stories of each family and the evidence from each community come together to show the entire extent of how their villages had been used. "You never understood what makes small towns strong," Margaret said to the federal commander. "It's our relationships with one another, not our loneliness or simplicity. Our common past and our refusal to allow anyone to use our houses as locations where lies can be concealed." Standing tall in spite of his history, Jensen took a stride forward. "She is correct. A basic misconception served as the foundation for both the memory manipulation and the concealed facilities. You believe that tiny communities were ideal for hiding since no one asks questions, but in reality, they do. They recall. They both share." As federal teams nationwide faced the same reality, the morning sun rose higher. Their flawless system of secrecy, which was based on the presumptive simplicity of small-town life, was being destroyed, not by violence or force, but by the same characteristics they had attempted to take advantage of. Shared truth, neighborhood harmony, and the strong ties that bind neighbors. The most potent force isn't always about technology, weapons, or flawless procedures, as Margaret stated one last time. People must unite and refuse to allow their communities to be exploited against their will. Clara came bearing fresh coffee from the diner, which is now a representation of resistance in the community. "Now what?" Margaret grinned as she observed the villagers starting the mending process, exchanging tales, encouraging one another, and fortifying the ties that had kept them safe during the gloom. "We rebuild now," she said. "Not only documents or structures, but also faith in one another, trust, and the understanding that no force on earth can erase our true selves when we are together as little communities." She saw the final government cars depart Silver Springs through her scope. They would arrive with the intention of containing a security breach. The awakening of America's little towns, united in their resolve to recover their communities from those who had attempted to exploit them as hiding places for darkness, was something far more powerful than what they had experienced. What about Margaret? With the truth that had helped release them in her notebook, Grace inquired. "We now take steps to ensure that it doesn't occur again. Not in this country, not in any tiny town." As Margaret Lawson looked back on how it all began, a grandmother giving a financial literacy lesson and refusing to allow bullies to believe they could frighten her community, the sun shined brightly above Silver Springs. The greatest significant triumphs are sometimes achieved by common people banding together, remembering who they are, and refusing to allow anyone make them forget again, rather than by massive conflicts or well-thought-out strategies. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss this if you liked the last one. To watch, simply click. Remember to subscribe as well. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.